Okay, so things are really heating up in the 4K PTZ webcam space, and there's a new entrant in the race, which is the OBSBOT Tiny PTZ 4K webcam. Today we're going to look at that one compared to the Insta360 Link, as well as the predecessor, the OBSBOT Tiny PTZ 4K webcam. Let's go. Okay, so first, why don't we go over some of the specs of the camera itself. So, one thing I did notice is the fit and finish, I think, is a bit nicer than the Insta360 Link, whereas that one is, it looks like plastic, but I think the Insta360 Link's base is actually metal that's been coated. It looks a bit nicer, I would say, just in terms of fit and finish. The back is a removable USB-C cable, which is nice. But it feels pretty nice. Like I would say the weight is comparable. It's a little bit lighter than the Insta360 Link. It's a little bit bigger, but it's still a really good size. It's not too big. If you compare it to the original OBSBOT, the original OBSBOT is quite a bit heavier, as you can probably imagine, and there's a lot more kind of plastic and a lot more visible seams to it. So from a specs perspective, you know, one thing that I like to point out that's a huge factor in terms of image quality is that the OBSBOT Tiny 2 has a 1/1.5 inch sensor in it. So just to kind of compare that to some of the other options that you have, the Insta360 Link has a 1/2 inch sensor, so it's bigger sensor than that camera. The original Tiny PTZ 4K, which was still a pretty good image and good camera, had a 1/2.8 inch sensor, and in terms of comparisons, again, it's 1/1.5. It's almost as large as the Razer Kiyo Pro Ultra, which is still the biggest sensor at 1/1.2 inch. It is larger, however, than the Elgato Facecam Pro, which is 1/1.8 inch in terms of sensor, which has apparently the same sensor as the Nexigo Iris, also 1/1.8 inch. Now, from a resolution perspective, you can film up to 4000 by 3000 pixels in 4:3 at 30 frames per second. It also supports 4K, and you can then go to 1080p 60 or 1920 by 1440 at 60 frames per second. And of course, at all those different options, you have 30 frames and various other smaller frame counts per second as well. From an optics perspective, it's got an f1.9 aperture and 85.5 degree field of view. Now, the minimum focal distance, I keep getting these questions in my YouTube videos, is 10 centimeters. So if you're doing macro photography or putting things close to the lens, you can be as close as 10 centimeters away from it to get in focus. And the dimensions of it, you know, they're pretty respectable in terms of being pretty small, not quite as small as the Insta360 Link, but it's 47 millimeters by 44 millimeters by 62 millimeters, weighs 96 grams without the mount, or 143 grams with the mount. One thing I would point out that's a little bit, not quite a disappointment, but something that I would have liked to see a little bit longer, the USB-C cable. It's USB-C to USB-C, which I like. Includes an adapter as well, which I also like, but it's only about 1.5 meters. I think it could have been maybe slightly longer, maybe 2 meters, depending on your setup. You may need to get an extension or a longer USB-C cable that's capable of USB 3. Okay, so let's compare the image quality of the cameras out of the box. I'm looking at the original OBSBOT right now, which is on the left. Now I'm looking at the OBSBOT Tiny 2 in the middle. And if I move over to the right-hand side, I'm now looking at the Insta360 Link. One thing I would say in terms of what I notice about the different images is that, you know, it's a little bit washed, I would say, on the OBSBOT. Not quite as contrasty or sharp on the original OBSBOT Tiny 4K, but it's still a good quality image. The one in the middle, you can tell it's got a lot more clarity and crispness to it. The blacks are better. My shirt's black, and so, you know, from that perspective, the contrast and everything is a bit better, in my opinion. And also, when you go to the Insta360 Link, also a good image. It's a little bit on the pink side by default, I would say, but it's still a pretty good image, you know, across all three of these different cameras. But just so you can judge them for yourself, And when I come back, I'll try to tweak each of the images and see if I can get them to kind of match, and all three of them look their best with a few different tweaks to the settings. Okay, so these are the tweaked camera settings. I'll just go through quickly some of the small adjustments that I made to each one. So if I first select the OBSBOT Tiny 4K, in filters, I added color correction and just moved the gamma down a little bit to 0.16, minus 0.16, sorry. Brightness I moved down to minus 0.0037, so just a little tiny bit. And saturation minus 0.05. And the hue shift, I moved that to be a little bit less pink, a little bit more pink, to be 2.68 on the positive side. And so on the center camera, the OBSBOT Tiny 2, I actually didn't change anything. So that's more or less, well, it is what you just saw in terms of the default image, because I was trying to match the other two cameras to it because it was so good. All right, so if I go into the filters then for the Insta360 Link, what I changed there was I did gamma minus 0.1, and then on the app itself, I also changed two things. I bumped the contrast up to 59 on the camera controls for the Insta360 Link, the saturation down just 2 points to 48, and the sharpness up to 63. So with those different settings in place, I think all three of these are pretty close to matching. So this is again looking at the OBSBOT Tiny PTZ 4K on the left, the OBSBOT Tiny 2, the new camera in the middle, and the Insta360 Link on the right. You'll see that all three of them produce a pretty high quality image in terms of what you can get out of them with their respective sensor sizes. Okay, so one of the benefits of having a PTZ camera is the fact that you can actually have it track your movements. Now, most of mine is kind of at my desk, so I don't move a lot in frame, but just to get the idea of how smooth the movements are, I'm gonna move from side to side. And you'll see it's kind of getting some of the other cameras in the frame there. But as I move, the nice thing with the OBSBOT, this is the Tiny 2, is that it is a very smooth motion. So I like to liken it to how a camera op, if you've ever worked with professional camera operators who are using, high-end equipment, on their tripods, or if they're operating a jib or a Wally Dolly or a slider, it's very human-like in terms of its motion. It's not too aggressive. It moves very well from side to side, kind of like a person would in terms of a camera op. So that's one thing I've always liked about the OBSBOT from the Tiny PTZ 4K perspective, whereas other PTZ cameras sometimes are a bit jerky and a bit fast in terms of their motions back and forth. So this one again, I'll just go ahead and move one more time, and you can get an idea of how it moves with me then in the frame. Okay, so now we're looking at the Insta360 Link. Let me go ahead and show what the tracking looks like on that as a comparison. You can see it's already hunting a little bit in and out in terms of trying to find its frame on me. I'm gonna go ahead and move left to right. And to me, this is on the slow setting, by the way. To me, this is a little bit jerkier than I would want it to be from a tracking perspective, and you can still see it's hunting in and out a bit. The image quality is quite good, as you can tell, but as it moves around, unless I'm moving really slow, and I'm not really going out of frame, but it's kind of moving around pretty quickly. If I turn on tracking speed so it's normal, let me try that. That's on the slow tracking speed, so that's the least aggressive of the tracking speeds. If I go to normal, it's even faster and a bit more, like, you get seasick, sorry about this. But it's tracking me even quicker. So you can kind of see the difference there in terms of the Insta360 Link, and it's still hunting a little bit in terms of tracking. So my preference in this test specifically is the OBSBOT Tiny 2. Now let's take a look at the original OBSBOT 4K. Okay, and just for sake of completion, let's go ahead and compare the OBSBOT Tiny 4K camera. So I'll just move left and then to the right, and you'll see that it's again very smooth, kind of like the Tiny 2's motion was. I prefer this type of motion over the faster motion. It probably depends on your use case. If you're an aerobics instructor or something, or moving around a lot in frame, that might be a preference of yours to have it move more quickly, depending on how quickly you move. But if you're just doing like online meetings where you're more or less at your desk, or even if you're teaching but more or less at your desk, I think that this motion is a lot smoother and a lot more, a lot less distracting, I guess, from an audience perspective to watch as it tracks you when you move at more of a, say, a walking pace. If you were going to move at a running pace or do something more athletic, I guess, maybe those faster moves might work. And there are different speeds that you can adjust these cameras as well in terms of being able to track you at different speeds. But I've always liked, the way that the OBSBOT tracks from a motion smoothness, and just how it's more human-like in terms of how someone would want to track you, if you actually have a manual camera op running the camera. Okay, so now what I want to do is actually run through some of the different options that you have with the software that comes with the OBSBOT Tiny 2. So in terms of the controls you have, there's quite a lot here. So first, like with many of the gimbal cameras, you can add presets. So if you find a position that you like with the camera, you can add it as a preset, and that way you can easily go to that preset. Now, I've got tracking and everything turned on. There are quite a few different options here in terms of standard or motion tracking, and you can't really see it here because I'm not moving much or too quickly. There's something else though that's pretty cool, which is called zone tracking. Now what this does is that if you say move between 3 different places in a room, for example, maybe a seated position, a whiteboard, and maybe if you've got a monitor on the other side of the room, what it will do is it will track you when you get close to those different objects. So I can't unfortunately show that here because my room's too small, but I'll throw up some B-roll in terms of the website from OBSBOT to show you what that looks like. But it's pretty cool in terms of being able to kind of lock on those different positions, and then you can move between those positions, and it will basically find you and move the camera in the right position to capture you, as well as that whiteboard or that display or that other picture on the wall or whatever you're wanting to focus in on. In addition, you can manually adjust the gimbal. So for example, if you just want to tweak it, let's say I want to go down a little bit to get a little bit higher in my frame. Now from an image perspective, there's a lot that you can tweak as well. So there's exposure settings, and one thing I really like is the exposure compensation. Of course, you can change it from auto exposure to manual. And if you go manual, you can actually set shutter speeds, ISOs, those kind of things, which is pretty cool. Same thing with focus. You can either manually focus if you want, or autofocus, and you can focus globally or on face. So it's doing face detection there as part of its autofocus. You can also set color temp. So here, normally my lighting's at about 5100 kelvins, but I think this looks pretty good. But if I go to auto exposure, it's a little bit maybe on the yellow side, but it's pretty close to how I would set it normally on my Sony cameras. And then image, you've got you got contrast, you've got saturation, sharpness, and hue. Those are all things that you can set. And then on the more interesting side of settings, and you can see HDR is coming soon, you can also do things like add background blur. So let's say, for example, I want to add some background blur. I can do that. One thing to note with the background blur, and you're seeing it a little bit in terms of the audio going out of sync with my lips. I think it does take a lot of performance. So if you want from your PC, so if you want to do background blur, you might need to either recalibrate your microphone, and it's kind of the same case if you're using things like NVIDIA Broadcast with the GPU. Your lip motion and movement will fall like an additional, say, 50 milliseconds out of sync, because it's taking a little bit more time to do the encoding, the processing, and then you know, produce the image with the background blur. You know, if you go into maybe the teens or something, it starts to look like a normal camera lens. You can see a little bit in terms of the, you know, the outlines of your hairlines, those kind of things. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So I'll just turn that off. And you'll see everything kind of speeds back up once I do that. Then there's the retouch filters, and these are funny actually. I like these. So you can go to native filter. So this kind of basically, you can see it smoothed out my skin a little bit, but it's slowing it down again. So you can tell it's going, well, I'm at 1080p 60. So it slowed down the processing of it a little bit. Now when I go to classic, you can see it give me some nice red rosy lips, changed my skin tone a little bit and made my skin a little bit smoother. And then on the men's setting, it's a little bit more subtle in terms of what it does. It doesn't quite process as much, so you can tell it's still slowed down from a lip sync perspective, but it gives you the ability to kind of change the way the image looks. And this is, I guess, based on what men prefer in terms of the filtering that they would apply. Something else that's kind of funny is if you've ever been into a house of mirrors, you can actually use some of these different settings. Since I'm only kind of framing myself from the shoulders up, you can't really see all of it, but you can actually do things to slim yourself down. You've also got the options of using different filters. So if I turn on nature filter, I can change that, the fresh filter, the clear filter, the crystal filter, the film filter, which kind of has that a little bit grainy, filmy look to it, sheer, pure, that actually looks pretty good there. I like that. Black and white, which isn't quite black and white. There's a little bit of pink, at least from what I'm seeing. And then soda. You can do various commands in terms of locking the target. If you want to lock it with hand gestures, you can also zoom in if you want to zoom in, like I'm doing here, or zoom out. Let's try to zoom out. There we go. You can do that with hand gestures. So there's also different voice controls that you have optionally that I won't show in this case, but you basically use the high tiny commands, and you can have it zoom in and out and all of those different things as part of it. And for audio, it's kind of cool. This camera's got a very good microphone in it. There's also different noise reduction settings that you can do. My room's not got a lot of noise in it, so I'll just change it to weak. Alright, so just so you can hear what the OBSBOT Tiny 2 microphone sounds like out of the box, the default setting, by the way, is noise reduction on weak. Now I'm going to go on the medium setting just to see if it sounds processed when I do post-production on this. And I will go then to the strong setting to see what that sounds like. Okay, so one more thing I want to show you is the remote control and some of the things that it can do. So you do need to enable the remote control in the app in order to use it. You do have there's a dongle that's in the back of a USB-A dongle that needs to be attached to use the remote control. But once you do that, you can actually control the camera with the remote control, the up, down, side to side. As you can see, you can do presets with it if you want, like I've just shown you there, and you've got very granular control over it. Now, the cool thing too with it is you can turn on different modes like tracking, the hand or close-up, you know, how close it is to you. I won't do that here because it kind of takes a second to reset, but those are very handy controls. And you've got a laser pointer that you can use for PowerPoint presentations or things on the wall that you want to point at. Plus you've got slide advance if you're using, say, PowerPoint with it, so it lets you do slide advance also with the remote. So the remote actually becomes pretty handy, especially say if you're a teacher and you're going through you know, PowerPoint deck, and you also want to move around your room between maybe your desk and the wall where the projector is projecting or the monitor is running your PowerPoint slides. It will let you do all of that. Okay, so that was the OBSBOT Tiny 2 webcam. One thing I didn't mention that I do like about both the OBSBOT Tiny 4K PTZ and this Tiny 2 camera is it comes with a nice carrying case so that you can transport it and not worrying about scratching up the lens or losing different parts for it. So it has that right in the box, so good to see that. Hopefully you can see in terms of the different cameras, how they perform against one another. My preference now, and I say that the front runner in the battle at the moment is definitely, for me, the OBSBOT Tiny 2. I like the way the gimbal moves. I like the way the image looks out of the box. It is a little bit more contrasty, a little bit darker than the Insta360 Link. I prefer that myself, but as you saw, you can tweak that camera as well as the OBSBOT Tiny PTZ 4K. So hopefully this helps you make a decision on your next 4K PTZ webcam purchase. If you like the video, be sure to give me a like, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content like this as we all navigate our work from home worlds, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.